Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from viewers, readers, and listeners like you, and organizations such as the Berlin Science Week and the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Visit CivicSciTV.org to learn more about our network of programs.
Exploring societal challenges through the lens of civic science. This is the Perspective Program with host Diya Dwarakanath.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Diya Dwarakanath, and today we're discussing food sovereignty and the science and the communities behind it. We have the pleasure of being joined by Ankur Shah, one of the co-founders of From Soil to Soul, a group focused on food sovereignty. Shah is a geospatial data scientist with a background in earth sciences, focusing on the environment. Welcome, Ankur.
Thank you so much for having me, Diya. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. As I learned more about food sovereignty, I realized it builds on the climate justice conversation that we had done in our previous segment, which our audience can check out in CivicSciTV's The Perspective playlist on YouTube. So let's connect the dots. I like to start with definitions. So can you tell a science communicator or a climate scientist who might be watching, what is food sovereignty?
So food sovereignty is basically taking back control of our food systems. What's happened recently in modern times is that the industrial food system has disconnected us from where we grow our food, how it comes to us, who grows it. But food sovereignty is taking back that control, usually from corporations, and it's more community-led. When food systems are sovereign, you are growing your own food, you are providing for yourself. Many indigenous tribes do it still to this date. And so do people like the Amish people do that. So they're food sovereign. So that means if there's a pandemic that causes harm in their supply chains and people around them lack access to certain foods, if they're growing it, they'll still have access because they're food sovereign or food independent.
Okay. And I understand your group is called From Soil to Soul, which is also the same name of the pilot episode that you released for the documentary series that you're doing. In a sentence or two, what is the series about? And feel free to tell us about this pilot episode too.
Sure. So From Soil to Soul is more like a labor of love for the food system. What we aim to do is through stories of BIPOC food activists, farmers, leaders, we hope to activate systemic transformation to reconnect people back to their food systems. Our pilot episode of From Soil to Soul is called Food Justice in LA. And as the title suggests, it's about food justice in Los Angeles through real examples, community-led examples of how people are transforming their urban food systems via urban farms, food forests, and native landscaping or foodscaping.
Okay, yes, I saw the trailer episode or the trailer for the episode, and it's quite interesting. Talking about soil health, a friend recently told me about that, and also regenerative farming, which goes beyond organic farming. So, what are those things, and how do they connect to your work?
Which things? Sorry, soil health.
Soil health and that regenerative farming. Yeah. I'm personally just curious.
Sure. So soil health is something that has been in focus recently, and it needs to be. What's happened due to the green revolution is that we've increased our yield, our output of food production through chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides and so forth. And that's improved yield, but that's decreased soil health because soil is living. We usually call, soil dirt. That's very incorrect because soil is living. And healthy soil is supposed to have a microbiome full of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, worms, so many living beings within soil. If you see soil under a microscope, you'll know what I'm talking about because it's a world of its own. It's so exciting and fascinating. So what we aim to do with food production and what we aim to communicate is that healthy soil means healthy people. Unhealthy soil leads to the diseases we're seeing today, cancers, certain various types of gut issues. Even our body has a microbiome, which has the similar content or bacteria that from the food we eat. And the food we eat comes from the soil we grow in. And the soil needs to be healthy in order for humans and animals and our ecosystems to be healthy.
Okay, that sounds great. I think I'm going to have to ask you for a research paper for our audience if they're curious to dive more into that, and we'll share that in the description on that. I wasn't aware that the soil can also affect like some of our health conditions, and of course our microbiome that I have heard of, but that is interesting. So you've mentioned this idea of a sustainable food system. What does that really mean?
Yeah, a sustainable food system, if we take a more holistic view, is a food system that nourishes people while nourishing the ecosystem and other species living in it, and the soil, of course. The soil needs to be nourished and healthy. Uh, Again, what's happening now is we are polluting our soils, polluting our environment. Agriculture contributes to about 25 to 30% of emissions globally, whereas it could be a sink for carbon. It's not right now. And due to agriculture, specifically livestock production, deforestation has been a major driver, especially in the tropics, for species loss, biodiversity loss. So a sustainable food system would ideally look like a food system which nourishes the soil, meaning practicing regenerative agriculture, or at least organic agriculture, helps the people, right? The people growing your food. Farmers are currently one of the lowest paid professions internationally, quite a bit. And the farmers, even in India and countries like India, commit suicides because they cannot repay loans. Their debt is so high. So that's not sustainable. What we aim to do is help deliver better social outcomes and environmental outcomes, and better health outcomes for people consuming food. That would be sustainable.
Okay. I see. So technically, a company could potentially create a sustainable food system, but that's just not what we see right now. That's the challenge.
Yeah, for most of the world, that's not what we see. There are really good examples of a sustainable food system, especially when you consider certain ancestral food systems, tribal food systems, or even small-scale community gardens and or food forests. But widely speaking, it's just not happening at the population level globally.
Right. I think there's a lot you're saying that can be learned from ancestral and indigenous tribes and the way and the food systems they have in place.
Right.
So I'd love to dig deeper, pun intended. What is From Soil to Soul's theory of change, or the principle on which your organization is operating to affect change?
Right. So
not really your organization, but your team right now.
Yeah. No worries. So we are creating a docuseries, and we aim to create 8 episodes, each on different topics, specific topics within creating a sustainable food system. So topics such as health and food, food justice, regenerative agriculture, urban farming, all of these are covered within each episode, even food waste mitigation. But what we aim to do is, instead of just creating some media to inspire people, we want to target specific audiences who can actually make decisions and enact change through our episodes. So we're more like an action-based docuseries. It's not just watch this, it's great, and then people are left questioning, that was great, but what next? What should I do? And we want to answer that question through targeted screenings, calls to action, hosting panels. And our mission, the way we would hope to enact change, is connecting people in community through our targeted screenings and events that we host, and create resources such as the Urban Farmers Almanac for LA that our co-founder Margaret helped to create. It's a resource for people to find out, where are the local farms, where are the urban gardens, where are my food forests, and we aim to reconnect these our audiences with the local food system. One quick story I'd like to tell is one of our audience members at our pilot episode screening was so inspired by the episode and the panel following it that she visited with her friends Compton Community Garden that we featured in our episode. So she went there, and then a couple of her friends were then inspired to grow a garden in their backyards. And this is the kind of change that we want to hear about and inspire, because we can show all the media we want, but if it doesn't translate to action, then it's futile.
Yes. I can see that. And I on that note, I was wondering, from that pilot screening, you heard this story of actual action being taken. Are there any interesting or new research questions, like as a scientist, that you found interesting when you were doing the docu-series, that first episode at least, talking to the community leaders and the farmers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the scientific questions that we aim to address in one episode is, at least, what are the health outcomes in areas that do not have healthy food access? So we covered in our pilot episode, we covered areas and the issues behind why food justice is of concern, and areas that have low income, usually other BIPOC races, they don't have access to healthy foods and grocery stores, because stores don't want to go there, and instead they have liquor stores or fast food places, and that leads to certain health issues. But what are they is a question that we want to explore in one episode. And how can health be improved through specific community actions if they don't have healthy food access? Another issue is one of our food forest founders, Imani Diggs, mentioned how soil is living and it has life, but dirt is a bad word. So we want to really explore scientifically, how is soil health? What are some quantitative measures of soil health in areas that have revitalized soils, in community gardens, in urban food forests, in native landscaping, native foods areas? So we want to explore that as well. Like that's connecting back to our conversation before.
Yes, makes sense. Makes sense. And that's great that there are actual research questions you're getting out of these conversations that you're having. And a question I have that is essential to the perspective is, how does small local community engagement create impact or solve big entrenched systemic problems?
Really great question. What we believe at From Soil to Soul is that there is no silver bullet to redefine or re-envision our food system. Solutions are going to be very local and very culturally oriented. One example is that people believe we need to reduce eating meat and become vegetarian or vegan in order to save our planet. And I agree to a certain extent. I'm vegetarian myself. I don't eat meat. But in the context of other places like Alaska or Alaska or the Arctic, this is just not possible. In fact, growing vegetables there would actually harm the native ecosystem instead of So that's why cultures have evolved eating certain foods. And what's happening now globally is that diets are shifting to a more Western diet, to more fast food, to more oily food, processed foods, away from their ancestral diets. So what we believe at From Soil to Soul is that there's no global silver bullet, no single thing that's going to solve this issue. Rather, it's going to be a set of local solutions implemented locally and revitalizing local economies and local food systems that's going to really scale, right? Now, there could be translation of solutions to certain areas, like certain solutions in LA could be translated to other cities, right? Like New York or so forth. But to say that what's being done in LA can be done globally, the same thing, it's just not going to happen. And that isn't the goal. So we want community leaders globally to step up, and we hope to connect them with their local populations and local food systems, and drive local change, but on a global level.
Okay. And do you have like an ultimate success metric for to measure that?
That's a big question. We hope that we can hear and track our impact of screenings and track, for example, stories like I mentioned before, like people visiting and then creating their gardens. A success metric would be, in a certain area, how many gardens were inspired by From Soil to Soul. And that would mean us doing surveying or so forth. But how many people were inspired after the screening to create something of their own, at least grow food? How many people visited a community garden after our screening, or an urban farmer, anything that grows food? We are going to define this more and more as we go forward and actually create our episodes for the documentary series. But we aim to be more community oriented and community based and people focused, and not just tech focused.
Okay. And I think that's a good start right there. Mm-hmm. And it's a work in progress always. So since you're focused on this action oriented approach and on outreach, what made your team choose a film as the medium for doing that kind of work?
Great question. All three of us, Margaret Cho, Janvi Mange, and myself, we have been inspired by film. And Margaret's an animator, graphic designer, and her partner, Eldon, is our cinematographer. So they've worked in film for a long time. I've been creating YouTube videos on environmental education for the past 5 years, which are more shorter. They're 5 to 10 minutes long. I haven't worked on documentaries or docuseries, but I've been creating some short videos that are meant for education. And then Janvi has a lot of experience in permaculture, regenerative design, and sustainability design. And we've all been inspired by certain films. So I've been inspired by a documentary called Racing Extinction. That's a documentary on the biodiversity crisis and how, what can we do about the biodiversity crisis globally, especially endangered species, loss of endangered species. An Inconvenient Truth is another one that, at least inspired that idea that climate action is very necessary. It's huge. So we think that film can have a broader reach and at least inspire our audience. It would be harder to track what's next for that audience, what that leads to. It's hard. But we think that showcasing stories that have not been told before, especially of BIPOC leaders and youth leaders around food system solutions, that's something that we're doing a little bit differently compared to other documentaries. And we're not advocating for one single solution. It's going to be very place-based.
Okay. And can you expand on that? How is your approach different from other documentaries or other food nonprofits? You touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, so certain documentaries that have really inspired us are Kiss the Ground, Common Ground, but they focused mainly on this big idea of, okay, let's do regenerative agriculture, let's transform our food system, and then showcase certain examples. And while that's super effective and very impactful, we wanted to highlight certain voices that are marginalized, that have not been even chosen for documentaries before. Examples, I won't name specific people, but the examples include a young leader who's creating a national network of urban gardens in the US. And she's working on some very specific youth leadership for gardening. Another example is a community garden in food justice neighborhoods that hasn't been showcased as much before. And so we want to highlight certain examples that are more like, it's not an actor, it's not someone famous, it's just the person who decided to start this. And that means anyone inspired or moving in that direction could do it. And the idea is to showcase solutions that can be replicated, not something that's grand and massive and hard to achieve. So that's what we're doing differently.
Okay. And that sounds powerful. And to go back to the metric of how to measure what you're doing, I think the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have come up with some metrics as well that around this topic. So we like to use that as a loose framework for diving into issues on this show. And for this episode, I was looking at the various goals, and your work really falls under goal 2, I think: end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. And the goal wants to do all of this, including doubling the productivity and outcome of small-scale food producers by 2030. And so based on your work in the film, how close do you think we are to achieving that goal?
Wow. In the US, we're not very close, to be honest. The scale for the past couple of decades has been reversing. I think only 5 or 8%, it's less than 10% at least, the number of farms owned by smallholder farmers, whereas the large ones, it's moving towards a monoculture, industrialized large-scale farming compared to a number of smallholder farms. In countries like Bolivia, India, Peru, it's still mostly owned by smallholder farmers, but even that's being corporatized right now as we speak. So companies like Bayer, Monsanto, Bayer bought Monsanto, Syngenta, all these companies are enabling industrial agriculture, which is mainly by corporations. And that's the trend that we want to reverse through this docuseries and through this movement that we hope to create. And so I don't think we're close yet. We're not nearly there at all. But I think there is hope. Farmers advocating for their smallholder farms and against the corporatocracy and corporate control of the land is what we need. And I think more and more people stepping up to at least be a part of the local food system, not necessarily have a backyard, own a community garden, but at least knowing where the food comes from, or at least volunteering a day or two of the week at some farm, I think that's going to make a difference at least, and not isolate us, the rest of the population, from farmers and who grows our food.
I see. Yes, yes. And like I read that for you, this this docuseries was personal, and it was also about what I found interesting was about learning and highlighting systemic solutions to food sustainability and climate challenges. So I'm very curious. Can you share one or two of those solutions that you have found?
Yeah, I think one really powerful solution that is not commonly talked about is, well, we learned this and highlighted this in our food justice episode, in our pilot episode, is native foodscaping. So Matthew Tutimas, who we interviewed in our episode, is a tribal indigenous biologist, and he explained how native foods, that just means native plants to the local ecosystems, have provided food for settlers and in this country for the past several centuries. But nowadays, most kids, even myself, for until I was 22, don't know what grows around me or what grows in our local ecosystem that's edible. So the idea is to get a cutting and then plant native plants in our front yards, in our backyards, that can provide food. And that's a process called foodscaping, in this case native foodscaping, because you're growing native plants. And this is such a powerful solution because, one, you're basically collecting cuttings or seeds from local plants around you, which is free of cost. And then instead of using lawns on our front yards or backyards that take a lot of time, energy, money to maintain, it just looks bland. It doesn't even look beautiful. You are then creating a native foodscape, a native food forest, and growing food that's local to your ecology. And that's a simple solution, right? That's a systemic solution. And it doesn't mean you have to do the same thing everywhere. Native plants will be different in different places, but you can adjust, adapt, and do that. Another solution is community gardens. It's such a powerful solution because it brings people together. Kids are excited about going out, and if classes are held, that's what a few of our partners do. They hold classes at community gardens for kids to learn how to grow food, what to eat, what recipes can you cook. It reconnects the youth back to gardens, and this can be done in schools itself. Schools can have gardens that connect kids to growing food. Another solution that's, again, a little more systemic, is food forests as well. It's how can you transform blocks? How can you transform alleyways into forest, a food forest? It's just growing a bunch of food plants in a small space, and people can harvest that as needed. So yeah, I think there are several solutions that can be done. Another thing we're going to highlight in our documentary is farm to school meals. So school meals are another thing that's in the US, it's completely unhealthy. Childhood obesity rate is increasing because of what they eat in schools. And it's often very much junk food and fried food and so forth, processed. But if local farms are incentivized and subsidized to provide meals to students in schools, it connects the dots between the school and the farm. It helps farmers gain an income, helps students eat healthy foods, and ultimately changes behaviors and mental health of students in schools. So this is another like multi-solution thing that we can easily achieve.
Okay.
So there are many such things we're trying to highlight in the series.
And that's hopeful, I think. What has been the most surprising lesson learned for you in doing this work and working on this film?
Well, a surprising thing for us has been, it's a good thing, how excited people are when we talk about this, and they're excited to learn that, oh, we can actually do something. We can, this is something we can achieve. And we really want to help break down barriers between what a person can do and changing the food system. We don't want it to be something that's only done by the rich people, only done by people with a lot of money. It's something that the everyday person can do. And it's exciting to see that there is excitement and that eagerness to see this docuseries. It's we are super grateful to witness that.
Yeah. That's a good note. I have one last question for you
Yeah.
before we wrap up. What actionable advice do you have for others doing similar work on food sovereignty based on what you and the founders now know?
It's really all about building partnerships and building community. We could not have done any of this ourselves. We are only highlighting solutions and telling these stories because we have very strong partnerships with actual community gardens, urban farms, indigenous leadership organizations, and so forth. So building community, building partnerships, and finding the right people in this system has been key to this whole process. So if other people are doing some similar work on food sovereignty, then definitely don't do it alone, and find people, find communities who are already doing this, learn from them, highlight them, partner with them, and build community, build an audience around the whole thing. So that's my advice, and it's been very, very helpful, even in terms of growth, highlighting solutions, collaborating with other Instagram accounts, other our partners has been vital to our release and success so far.
Okay, that's good to hear, and I am going to wrap up on that note, which is a great note to wrap up on. So I wish we had time for more. There's always so many more questions to ask and things to dive into. But thank you so much for your time today, and to our audience. Remember, science belongs to all of us. Ankur, thank you for your time and expertise today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really grateful to be here.